We turn to Iran, where local media has reported that over 1 million mourners have taken to the streets this week for the funeral of Iran's top security and intelligence commander, Qasem Soleimani, whom the U.S. assassinated in a drone strike last Friday at the Baghdad International Airport. Commander Soleimani was the leader of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard's elite Quds force. He was reportedly the second most powerful person in Iran's government. The assassination was ordered by President Donald Trump without congressional authorization. Many people say that this assassination violates international law and amounts to an act of war. It's an alleged war crime. What is your reaction to this story, Jimmy?
So not only is it a violation of international law and a war crime, but it sets up an even worse scenario than people are aware of, right? So everyone is afraid of what is Iran's response going to be to this. And Iran is going to have a response because their people are going to demand one. There are millions of people in the streets right now. What people don't realize is this general we took out, he was fighting ISIS, right? So he is beloved across the Shia world, not only in Iran. So let's say we are able to somehow patch this back up after Iran responds, and we have some kind of peace d'etat with Iran. Well, that doesn't mean the rest of the Shia world is going to go along with that. They're still going to be upset about this. This guy was a real hero to them. So again, we've set off a powder keg now that we probably won't be able to stop. And you know what? That's exactly what the crazy neocon warmongers in Washington, D.C. wanted in the first place. They wanted a snowball rolling downhill that we couldn't stop. And so now it seems like they may have gotten their wish.
The assassination took place in Iraq, which the U.S. illegally invaded in 2003. Since then, more than 2.3 million Iraqis have reportedly been killed. Now, it's hard to know the exact numbers because the U.S. military doesn't keep account. The U.S., of course, has justified the execution by claiming that Soleimani posed an imminent threat to American lives. So far, there's no evidence that's been shown to support that theory. Vice President Mike Pence has also tweeted that the Iranian general, quote, assisted in the clandestine travel to Afghanistan of 10 of the 12 terrorists who carried out the September 11th terrorist attacks in the United States. Again, no evidence supports such a claim. Even the most mainstream of the media, the New York Times, says that the public record does not back up Pence's statement. But it's too late. This reported falsehood has already spread far and wide online. Jimmy, we're repeating history again.
You know, the only difference this time is that these guys trying to start this particular war are such transparent clowns, people see right through their lies. So Rumsfeld and Colin Powell and Condoleezza Rice and George Bush were better at lying than these guys. Everyone knows that this guy wasn't helping Al-Qaeda, and everyone knows who knows anything that not only was Iran was helping us fight terrorism in Afghanistan after 9/11. So we were partnering with these very people to fight against our common enemy at the time, which was the Taliban, which was Al-Qaeda. And now we've moved on to ISIS. So no one believes Pompeo. No one believes these clowns. As before, people did get duped. The media still will repeat their lies uncritically. It seems, unfortunately, that doesn't happen here. It doesn't happen at places like my show. You have to really look for news that doesn't repeat the Pentagon's talking points. But that's the beauty of this time, is that these guys are much worse liars.
Yeah, and at the top of the show, you said this was very dangerous. The Trump administration has officially escalated America's assassination and targeted killing policy with this action, setting a dangerous precedent for international politics. In 1976, President Gerald Ford signed an executive order banning all members of the U.S. government from engaging in political assassinations anywhere in the world. But by classifying the Quds Force as a foreign terrorist organization, the U.S. has essentially given itself permission to sidestep that executive order. Now, it's important to note that Trump is not the only president to circumvent that rule. Every president since Reagan has done exactly the same. Jimmy, if the government always finds a way to justify its actions by claiming terrorism, what's the point of even having these rules?
Well, the point of having them is so that people think that we're a respectable government. That's the point of having these rules. So as Chomsky has pointed out, if we held every president to the war crime standards at Nuremberg, every president of the United States since World War II would be considered a war criminal, right? So that's why it's funny, while we're impeaching Donald Trump for a phone call to the Ukraine, he's doing this war crime right out in front of in open of everybody. Also what he's doing in Yemen. Also what George Bush is dancing on Ellen right now, a bona fide war criminal who ordered a torture program. The whole government is corrupted, which is why we're in all these wars, which is why Trump is allowed to do this. A guy who they say, think about this, a guy who the Democratic Party has been saying at the top of their lungs for 3 years is a puppet of Putin. Right? A foreign leader is directing his actions. They just decided to give him $131 billion more to go bomb whoever, I guess, Vladimir Putin wants him to bomb, except it's not this time. It's Iran, which Vladimir Putin is in line with. So this doesn't make any sense. It goes against their narrative, and it just goes to show you that they're 100,000% corrupt. For the last 3 years, the Democratic Party doesn't have a platform to offer the people to vote for them for, so they've decided to push this Russiagate thing, saying that Donald Trump is a Putin puppet. Well, now he's bombing Iran, which is the client state, so it's obvious that it's not a Putin puppet move in this, but they're okay with it. If you saw how the Democrats pushed back against Donald Trump's bombing and this assassination, they were upset about the process. They weren't upset that he's actually doing this. They're upset that he might not have a plan to back it up, and they're upset that he didn't ask Congress to do this. They're not upset with war. They're very pro-war. As President Barack Obama admitted to Colonel Wilkerson in 2014, there's a pro-war bias in Washington, D.C. And guess what? Barack Obama didn't know what to do about it, and neither does Donald Trump. So what we're seeing right now is Donald Trump being rolled by the military-industrial complex the same way that Barack Obama was rolled. There's a bipartisan agreement on war in in Washington, D.C., and that's why this is happening, and it ain't stopping.
No, and that's why we go after both parties so often on the show, because they are lockstep with one another, especially when it comes to war. Shortly after the announcement of Soleimani's killing, Michael Moore tweeted a headline from the news archives that reads, "Impeachment vote in House delayed as Clinton launches Iraq airstrike, citing military need to move swiftly." Again, we're in a historical loop. Between 1998 and 2020, our government can't even seem to make a new headline, can it, Jimmy?
That's kind of hilarious. I saw that also. That was really something, right? So, you know, there's wag the dog happening. The weird thing is that some people have said that Trump is doing this because of the impeachment, because he thinks that the drip of all these crimes coming out is bad for him. I don't think so. I think that his numbers are actually going up because of impeachment, just like Bill Clinton's did. But it is good to distract people. It is an election year. You have to get behind the president in a time of war. People got behind the president. I mean, even people like Dan Rather would come on CBS and pledge his allegiance to George Bush after 9/11. So that just goes to show you why people do things like this and why Trump would do this. And it is 2003 all over again, except the guys doing it this time are worse liars. And we have people like this show, we have people like Jesse Ventura with a microphone, we have people like me with a microphone. So now people can actually maybe get a counter narrative to what's happening.
Yeah, but it's almost as if the lies, it doesn't even matter if they're saying them, and people know that they're lying, and yet this action is still going on, and the American public knows it. Congress isn't able to respond to this to stop it if they wanted to, so it's kind of, it seems pointless.
Well, you know, that Congress and the Democrats actually could have stopped this if they wanted to. Ro Khanna and Tulsi Gabbard both had provisions in the last NDAA, the National Defense Authorization Act, right, which is where Trump gets all his money to go do this bombing. They had put in that Authorization Act a specific provision that prevented the President of the United States using any of this money for a war on Iran. Guess what? They took that out and the Democrats went right along with it. Why? Because they're both owned by the military-industrial complex. Think about 131 billion extra dollars they've given Donald Trump, meaning the Democrats have given Donald Trump, since he became president, an extra $131 billion to do more war. Do you know what that would have done? That would have given us free college every year. That would have ended homelessness in the United States, and you would still have about $30 extra billion to do whatever you wanted. And that's every year from now on until perpetuity, Brigida, that they're going to spend an extra $131 billion every year, not just this year, not just next year, but forever.
The U.S. defense officials now say that they're going to send over 3,000 more troops to the Middle East for reinforcement. Once again, Trump's actions speak louder than his tweets. I'm going to show you an old one in which he claims he'd bring the troops home from the, quote, ridiculous and costly endless wars. Jimmy, these guys tell lie after lie after lie, and their base only seems to grow.
So I did see his base push back against him on this. So I think that this is definitely a mistake that Trump's making with his base. So it's a big reason why a lot of people voted for Donald Trump was because he presented as a populist anti-interventionist, right? And I think he actually is an anti-interventionist. I think his instinct is to pull us out of these wars. But just like Barack Obama, he's being rolled by the military-industrial complex. I mean, an extra $131 billion a year is a lot of power to throw around and a lot of money. So yeah, they're doing it again, and they're being rolled by the bill. You know, Eisenhower, when he left office, said we had to resist the undue influence of the military-industrial complex, and he wasn't lying.
No, and that's because these wars are incredibly costly for American taxpayers. While our infrastructure crumbles and our drinking water supplies remain tainted, defense contractors are winning big. Stocks of Lockheed Martin, Northrop Grumman, and Raytheon rallied after Soleimani's assassination. Crude oil futures also went up.
Right.
War is a racket, Jimmy. It just is.
Well, everybody, there's a lot of people. So as General Smedley Butler informed us, what a racket is when only a few people on the inside know what's really happening, right? So war appears to most of the people as having an actual purpose, but there's only a few people on the inside who know the actual purpose. And you and I know the actual purpose of this war racket, Brigida, is a lot of money. I mean, just think about the trillions of dollars that have been spent just in our lifetimes on nothing, on setting the Middle East on fire, on creating chaos. The sad joke is that they actually don't, the people in the military-industrial complex, the United States military, the Pentagon, the State Department, they actually don't want peace. They actually do want chaos. They actually do want an endless war, because once we got rid of the Cold War ended, they needed to make sure we kept spending money on the military, and boy, did they find out a good way to do it. It was from terrorism, and now it's fighting these regime change wars, and it's always got something what's always up underneath it: oil, Saudi Arabia, and Israel.
All right, it's time for a break. When we return, Jimmy sits down with the president of the National Iranian-American Council to talk about the escalating conflict between Washington and Tehran. We'll be right back.
The world according to Jesse.
Assassination of Soleimani. A product of just an impulsive foreign policy. I mean, it really sounds like Donald Trump made this decision unilaterally, not based on any input from anybody else. All the reports are that the assassination of Soleimani was put on the table as the extreme option to make the other options look less extreme, and he went for the extreme option. So to me, you know, I look at the fact that the Supreme Leader was tweeting at Donald Trump the day before, probably insulted his ego, and apparently Trump was really upset that the fact that he pulled away from the brink. You know, he was 10 minutes away from supposedly bombing Iran last year. He pulled back from that, and he didn't like the response that he got in the media and the American public, and so he decided he needed to be tough. And so I think he made the decision that way. And there was really no thought about, okay, what are the implications? What comes next? How does the U.S. respond to this? And so now you see the U.S. military and diplomatic infrastructure all scrambling to try to put the pieces together after this decision.
mainstream media pundits always make sure to say Soleimani was a bad guy before condemning the assassination. But Soleimani wasn't all that different from American warmongers. Isn't the U.S. guilty of the exact thing it accuses Iran of doing?
Yeah, there's this attempt to make this a moral decision, as if the United States and the Trump administration and the U.S. military is the decider of who is moral and who is not, who's good, who is bad. I mean, the bottom line is this was a dumb, self-defeating, bad, non-strategic decision that is going to, destabilize the region, hurt the United States. But this notion, of, oh, Soleimani is a bad guy or a good guy, well, yeah, Soleimani was involved in acts of violence that I think are bad. I would say that he did bad things. I would even say he was a bad guy. There are people in Iran who probably disagree, and a lot of Iranians view him as somebody who was off doing those things to try to protect Iran from ISIS and from outside threats, and to make sure that Iran didn't become like Syria. And I think, you can say the same thing about us over here. I mean, there are plenty of people in the United States who think that, the U.S. military is unquestionably good because they're out there, protecting America from perceived threats and things like that. So the entire argument about morality, I mean, this is the same crap that we heard with Saddam Hussein. We had to take him out because he was a bad guy and he tried to kill George Bush's father, and so he was evil. And like, decisions that are made on that basis are, I mean, that's fine if you want to run a foreign policy and a security policy based on your feelings and your emotions, but I don't think that's a sound way to actually achieve any real interests. Or, if you want to do good in the world, I don't think that's the way to do it, to commit assassinations that are actually in violation of the laws that have been set up and the international agreements that have been set up in order to ensure that we don't have one sole decider of what's good or what's bad.
Yeah, and Trump is also reintroducing preemptive war through this, which I thought we were done with after George Bush's preemptive war on Saddam Hussein, but I guess not. So what was Soleimani's role in the fight against ISIS? Wasn't he seen all over the Shia world as being the #1 fighter of ISIS and conqueror?
Yeah, Soleimani arguably, more than any single individual, was responsible for the defeat of ISIS. And I think that most American officials actually would probably agree. I think that the counterpoint that's often raised is, well, he played a major role in coordinating the Shia militia groups and coordinating Iran's strategy and coordinating with other forces fighting ISIS, and played a big role in that. But because he was so brutal, and because he was involved in bolstering these groups, these Shia groups, that then triggered a Sunni counter-response and actually radicalized and created this opportunity for a group like ISIS to enter the picture. But when you start going down that road, this whole chicken or the egg thing, I mean, well, why is Soleimani organizing those groups? Why are the Shias being propped up? Well, it's because the United States invaded Iraq and created a vacuum there. And why? I mean, you can just go down the line. But the bottom line is, this guy played a major role in defeating ISIS, and now he's dead, and the United States is going to get kicked out of Iraq, and I don't know who's going to be there to make sure ISIS doesn't return.
So now your organization has worked to gain support for the Iran nuclear deal in order to save it. What do you think will happen to the nuclear deal now? I mean, is there any hope of salvaging it?
Well, so the Iranians announced a couple days ago that they were going to cease their nuclear constraints. They were going to abandon the constrictions on their nuclear program, and a lot of media analysts and pundits took that to mean that Iran was abandoning the deal, which is actually not the case. It's actually very interesting that Iran made that announcement, which was actually scheduled well before the Soleimani assassination. Iran has been systematically announcing these reductions in its compliance with the nuclear deal because the United States is violating it, and because Iran is not actually getting the sanctions relief that was promised. But in making that announcement, Iran actually made very clear they're not leaving the deal. They will return to the deal if the United States does, even in the midst of this massive crisis.
Right.
And so, to me, the deal is on life support. The prospect of Iran negotiating with Donald Trump, I think, at this point, it's impossible. But it's not dead. They haven't pulled the plug yet. And I think that the nuclear deal still remains the last best hope to actually have a framework for diplomacy between the United States and Iran. And the hope is that, if not Donald Trump, then it's going to have to be the next president that actually brings the U.S. back to that deal. And I think it's a faint glimmer of hope, but there is hope still alive to salvage the agreement.
So now, prior to the assassination, Iran was already in turmoil, largely due to the impact of the U.S. sanctions. So how exactly have sanctions affected Iranian civilians?
Well, these are sanctions that are, by design, aimed at collective punishment. They're aimed explicitly at hurting ordinary people. And the theory behind them is that while the United States may not be able to get to Iran's leadership and make life hard for them, short of assassinating people like Soleimani, that the United States is going to make life miserable for ordinary Iranians. And in so doing, by making it difficult to buy basic food and luxuries like meat, imagine that, to deny Iranians access to basic medicine. I have family who can't get access to medicine that they need and medical supplies that they need. And by doing this, Iranians are going to get so fed up and so distraught that they're going to rise up against the Islamic Republic and either overthrow it or put so much pressure on the government that the government decides, okay, we need to surrender to the United States and do whatever Mike Pompeo and Donald Trump want us to do. This is a fatally flawed theory. We have seen protests inside of Iran, and I do think that the sanctions had something to do with that. But these are not protests that are democracy protests. It's not civil society organizing and actually building a movement or having a plan for how to democratize Iran or how to force the leaders to make certain decisions and change behavior. These are essentially food riots. These are people who are distraught and have nothing else to do and nowhere else to go. And that's a pathway to creating a failed state at best for the United States. But it's not a pathway to get to negotiations. And it's certainly not a pathway for the United States to claim to stand with the Iranian people or do anything good for the people of Iran, who they are directly punishing.
So now the U.S. has stopped dozens of Iranian Americans at the Canadian-Washington border as they attempted to return to the U.S. after traveling over the holidays. So how can Americans be better allies to the Iranian-American community?
Yeah, and so people were detained for as many as 11 hours at this border crossing. I've heard from many others who at airports have been pulled aside for secondary screening. And we've also seen police departments around the country issuing statements, see it, say it, and sort of what a lot of us in the Iranian American community viewed as kind of a veiled, suggestion that we needed to be monitored and that people needed to be vigilant against their friends and neighbors who happen to be of Iranian descent. And so, I would propose see it, say it, but, see it, say it. If you see hate crimes, if you see our own government cracking down on American citizens and American residents, we need to be mobilized and calling them out and holding them accountable and protecting our friends and our neighbors from that kind of treatment. So, it's important that this is being discussed in the media, it's being discussed publicly, and that, it's actually very, very helpful for people to be contacting members of Congress who have been allies on this, who are actually holding the administration accountable and trying to get to the bottom of what's happening here. Because really, the moment that this becomes commonplace and this becomes something that we just take for granted, that this is how the state treats its citizens, that's when the situation gets worse and it gets out of control. We cease to have ways to actually stop this kind of behavior and hold the government accountable to its own laws and to our Constitution.
Well, listen, Jamal, we're out of time, and thanks for trying to facilitate a path towards peace in Iran. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Good to talk to you.
turn to the viewers. We asked people on social media why Trump targeted Soleimani, even though the U.S. had previously declined to do so due to the potential backlash. Dan says, diversion to his problems. Republican presidents always want a scapegoat to help boost ratings, and bombing Arab countries are always in the GOP playbook. Jimmy?
Again, bombing Arab countries is a bipartisan action. When Trump, it was funny when Trump put the Muslim ban at from the liberals or the lefties went to the airports to protest the Muslim ban. They never asked themselves, why are there so many Muslims wanting to come to our country? It's because Barack Obama had just spent the previous 8 years bombing the hell out of them. So this idea that somehow it's the GOP's playbook, no, it is a system. My entire life we've been bombing the Middle East. This is not the GOP's playbook. This is the military-industrial complex's playbook, which owns both parties and our government. Why Trump did this is because, as Colonel Wilkerson said, the alligator from the swamp that Trump was supposed to drain, it rose up and it's gotten a hold of him. And just like it got a hold of President Obama. So the alligator from the military-industrial swamp got him by the neck, and that's why this is happening. And it's happening in this specific way.
Martha says, I'm sure it was time to distract from his upcoming trial. Now that Bolton says he'd testify at any Senate trial, Trump may blow up Soleimani's next in command. Trump doesn't know what he's doing, right? So he didn't. I don't think he realized what he did when he did it. He doesn't realize the consequences afterwards. So he does this thing that will certainly precipitate a war and a response from Iran and the Shia world. And his next statement is, we don't want war. Well, you just did war. You don't want war. You're in one. What do you call? If Iran would have done the same thing to us, if Iran launched an attack that killed Colin Powell and General Petraeus, we would be at war. So that's it's hilarious. It's a schizophrenic policy. Trump doesn't know what he's doing, and that's why the military-industrial complex having control of him like this is so dangerous. Absolutely. Thanks for watching, everyone. Send us your comments on social media for a chance to be featured next week when we cover more stories ignored by the corporate media. Jimmy, thank you so much for being here.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.